Hello, welcome back. We are in Numbers chapter 6, and this is about vows, the Nazarite laws, and making vows to God. And we're going to tie this into the New Testament and see what Paul did in regards to this. And again, I know I sound like a broken record, but when you learn the patterns of the Old Testament, the New Testament opens up. It's a lot like my analogy of a house. What the house was designed for is better than what we're using it for, even though we're happy with the house. We don't feel like we got cheated, mostly because we didn't know what the original design was. And when you study the Old Testament and the patterns, then the New Testament becomes what it was originally designed for. It's pretty exciting. And you're on your way there. You've studied Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, the book of Acts, and now you're going to study the 6th chapter of Numbers. So keep going. I'm going to read from the Complete Jewish Bible only because I want to. There's not really, there is a couple of good reasons, but you don't care what they are, so we're just going to roll with it. I think the wording's just better. It's a little bit more true to the original and to the Hebrew meaning. So here we go. Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell the people of Israel, when either a man or a woman makes a special kind of vow, the vow of a Nazir, consecrating himself to Adonai, he is to abstain from wine and other intoxicating liquor. He is not to drink vinegar from either source. He is not to drink grape juice, and he is not to eat grapes or raisins. As long as he remains a Nazir, he is to, and that's just Hebrew for Nazarite, he is to eat nothing derived from the grapevine, not even the grape skins or the seeds. Throughout the period of his vow as a Nazir, he is not to shave his head until the end of the time for which he was consecrated himself to Adonai. He is to be holy. He is to let the hair of his head grow long. Therefore, the period for which he has consecrated himself to Adonai, he is not to approach a corpse. He is not to make himself unclean for his father, mother, brother, or sister when they die, since his consecration to God is on his head. Throughout the time of his being a Nazir, he is holy to Adonai. If someone next to him dies very suddenly so that he defiles his consecrated head, then he is to shave his head on the day of his purification. He is to shave it on the 7th day. On the 8th day, he is to bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons to the Cohen at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The Cohen is just the high priest. The Cohen is to prepare one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, and thus make atonement for him, inasmuch as he sinned because of the dead person. That same day, he is to reconsecrate his head. He is to consecrate to Adonai the full period of his being a Nazir by bringing a male lamb in its first year as a guilt offering. The previous days will not be counted because his consecration became defiled. This is the law of the Nazir when his period of consecration is over. He is to be brought to the entrance of the tent of meeting, where he will present his offering to Adonai. 1 male lamb in its first year without defect as a burnt offering, 1 female lamb in its first year without defect as a sin offering, 1 ram without defect as a peace offering, a basket of matzah, loaves made of fine flour mixed with olive oil, unleavened wafers spread with olive oil, their grain offering and their drink offerings. The Cohen is to bring them before Adonai, offer his sin offering, his burnt offering, and his ram as a sacrifice of peace offering to Adonai with the basket of matzah. The Cohen will also offer the grain offering and drink offering that go with the peace offering. The Nazir will shave his consecrated head at the entrance of the tent of meeting, take the hair removed from his consecrated head, and put it on the fire under the sacrifice of peace offerings. When the ram has been boiled, the Cohen is to take its shoulder, 1 loaf of matzah from the basket, 1 unleavened wafer, place them in the hands of the Nazir after he has shaved his consecrated head. The Cohen is to wave them as a wave offering before Adonai. This is set aside for the Cohen along with the breast for waving and the raised up thigh. Following that, the Nazir may drink wine. This is the law for the Nazir who makes a vow for his offering to Adonai for his being a Nazir, in addition to anything more for which he has sufficient means. In keeping with whatever vow he makes, he must do it according to the law for the Nazir. Adonai said to Moshe, "Speak to Aaron and his sons and tell them, this is how you are to bless the people of Israel. You are to say to them, may Adonai bless you and keep you. May Adonai make his face shine upon you and show you his favor. May Adonai lift up his face toward you and give you peace. In this way, they are to put my name on the people of Israel so that I will bless them." In the original Hebrew, it sounds even better, but I just could not do it justice, and I didn't want to offend the whole Hebrew speaking population with my bad pronunciation. So I decided to read the English part. Okay, so chapter 6 consists basically of two pieces: the office of the Nazarite and the Aaronic blessing, which is the Aaron blessing. So, what a Nazarite was and did was not the same a few hundred years after it was given to Moses, or in Samson's day, even, or even later in Samuel's or Paul's day, because men had changed things. And when you hear all of that, you think, wow, that's a lot. That's complicated. It's expensive. It's time consuming. Yeah, imagine how lazy we've become, because I know I've said this before, but it's like if I get a bad parking spot or there's a line or there's a bunch of people or I can't get coffee, I'm not going to church that day. I'm just going to go home. And back in God's original blueprint, he expected us to work a little bit harder to get to him than we work now. And sometimes that work consists of a mile down the street or 30 miles across town. We just think it's too much. We're not willing to put forth that effort. So there are two basic kinds of Nazarites: perpetual and for life. And what we see in number 6 is the law of the perpetual Nazarite, which means that this person is a Nazarite for a time, and usually for a specific purpose. I don't know why they use the word perpetual, because it doesn't make any sense. To me, that means forever, but it apparently is not. It's a short time. I hadn't figured that one out yet. So, why would someone want to be a Nazarite? Well, the answer is generally someone would swear an oath to God that if God would grant some kind of special favor to them, then in return, they would turn their lives over to God for service to him for a time. Now, we see in Paul in the book of Acts joining with the 4 men that must have in some way violated their Nazarite vows. So in Acts chapter 21, verse 20 through 28, it says this. Let's see. After hearing this, they praised God, and then they said, "You know, dear brother, how many thousands of Jews have also believed, and they all follow the law of Moses very seriously. But the Jewish believers here in Jerusalem have been told that you are teaching all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn their backs on the law of Moses. They've heard that you teach them not to circumcise their children or follow other Jewish customs. What should we do? They will certainly hear that you have come. Here's what we will do. We will have 4 men here who have completed their vow. Go with them to the temple and join them in the purification ceremony, paying for them to have their heads ritually shaved. Then everyone will know that the rumors are false and that you yourself observe Jewish laws. As for the Gentile believers, they should do what we already told them in a letter. They should abstain from eating food offered to idols, from consuming blood or the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. This is one of the reasons that modern day pastors say that sexual immorality is the main important thing, because they don't believe that there's any sacrifice to idols anymore, and they don't believe that people would consume the blood of animals. So they picked that one as the most important one of God, when it really wasn't. It was really idolatry. But side note, so Paul went to the temple the next day with the other men. They had already started the purification ritual, so he publicly announced the date when their vows would end and sacrifices would be offered for each of them. The 7 days were almost ended when some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul in the temple and roused a mob against him. They grabbed him, yelling, "Men of Israel, help us. This is the man who preaches against our people everywhere and tells everybody to disobey the Jewish laws. He speaks against the temple and even defiles this holy place by bringing in Gentiles." What I love about that verse is they're basically saying, here's somebody who won't follow the law, we should kill him. And we think it's okay to not follow the law. We're not bothered by anybody not following the law. Okay, Brandon, get back to Numbers. Let's stay focused on the Nazarite vow. So this concerns 4 men who had been defiled, basically. So we're told that Paul also had his head shaved and went through the purification procedures with these men. This meant Paul had taken the vow of a Nazarite. It was not permitted to just join other people in their purification rituals. You had to take the vow too. Part of the reason James had Paul do this was because Paul was going to be walking around Jerusalem bald-headed. So everyone knew that a bald head meant that it was a walking billboard, basically, to show that Paul was following the law of Moses. That was a great indication. When you saw someone, you were like, oh, well, he's following the law of Moses. So we even see Paul at the end of a Nazarite vow in Acts 18:18, and Paul, having remained many days longer, took leave of the brethren and put out to sea for Syria, and with him were Priscilla and Aquila. In Caesarea, he had his hair cut, for he was keeping a vow. And that's Paul. Everybody says Paul's the first Christian and all that, and he gave up the law. But here it is in Acts, he's following it too. So a Nazarite was just any ordinary Israelite who made a choice to dedicate themselves wholly to God for a specific time period. The main attributes of a Nazarite were they abstain from strong drink and wine, they can't even eat grapes, they are not to cut their hair, and they're prohibited from touching a dead body. By means of his vow, he is given a status equal to the priest, though not a priest. So we'll see some things that were prohibited removed and others added, but these were not a God thing. They were a man thing. We add rules and take away rules all the time. Simply being in the room with the dead person was enough to contaminate and terminate the Nazarite vow. So the time of a Nazarite vow started all over again. So there's a phrase at the end of verse 12 that most Bibles say the previous days will not be counted. The Hebrew says his Nazir, Nezer, became defiled. His Nazir refers to the hair of the Nazarite because the sign of the consecration of a Nazarite is his hair, just as the sign of the high priest's consecration is his special hat, or consecration. I don't know why I can't say consecration, but the hair was seen as very important to Middle Eastern culture. Hair was considered the sign of a man's vitality and life force. That's why we get so upset when we start losing it. Hair in a pagan world was often given as a burnt sacrifice to the gods and goddesses also. It was the hair that carried the defilement that a Nazarite might incur. So in the same way, the hair carried the purity of a person. When the Nazarite completed his vow period, his hair was shaved off and burned as an offering because it was pure and clean and a holy thing to offer to God now because he had kept his vow. So we get the full ritual of the Nazarite in verses 13 through 20, and he brings the 4 main sacrifices: the burnt offering, the grain offering, the peace, and the reparation offering that we all learned about in Leviticus. So it cost the Nazarite 3 lambs in total to end his vow, a reminder of how costly it is to set yourself apart for God. It takes something. There should be a sacrifice there. So, and after shaving his hair off, the ritual ended with the words, "After that, the Nazarite may drink wine again." The chapter ends then with an Aaronic blessing, which is the blessing of Aaron. This blessing was spoken at each day following the morning sacrificial offering. This blessing is an early Hebrew poem, and that's one of the reasons I didn't try to read it in Hebrew, because it's beautiful when somebody that knows what they're saying says it. It's much prettier, so I didn't want to ruin it. The blessing is basically God bestowing on his people the things he counts as important and good for us. And when we read scripture, we find that blessing generally consists of good health, land, safety, sufficient food, and children. Blessing is a verb too. Now, it involves action. God feeling good towards us isn't blessing us. Would you want God to feel all fuzzy for you, but then not give you what you need? I mean, that doesn't really help you. He blesses us with protection and grace and peace. In Hebrew, it is protection, grace, and shalom. Shalom does not mean only peace. It means a kind of living well, a well-being, an overall in every sense. It means that God is near you. It means his salvation has been made available to you. This is not a blessing for the whole world either. It doesn't apply to everybody. It's only for those set apart that he calls my people. So Israel and those who joined Israel, this has never changed. It's still true today. Instead of joining Israel by pledges and oaths and circumcision, now we join Israel by means of faith in Yeshua, Jesus the Christ, Yeshua the Messiah. And that's Numbers chapter 6. And we see how it all ties back in with Paul and how Paul followed the law and tradition for the most part. The ones that contradicted the Bible, he didn't. But the ones that didn't, he stuck with. They were important to the culture. So that's chapter 6 of Numbers. God bless. Love God, love people, and change the world.